Hello there, this is the CMOS, the Code open source podcast and video interview series. My name is Gabor Sabo, I'm your host, and with me is Job van Achterberg. Hi Job, how are
Hey
you?
Gabor, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really happy to have you. Just to the other people who are not or listening or watching, we know actually each other from quite a while from the Perl community, from various conferences, but we've never had a real sit down and an interview or talking about your past. So please tell me a little bit about how did you get into computers, programming, and wherever you are.
How far back? That's my parents' fault. They bought this old 32 kilobyte BBC Micro, and it had a floppy drive. You turn it on and you get a basic prompt. So back in the old days, and it came with these books to learn programming, and that's kind of how that started. You figure out you can make a machine do stuff, and you want to make it do more stuff, and that's yeah. I discovered I liked that, and eventually got a job into system administration and got into okay, well, we need a website, it needs to be dynamic. Oh, I think I've read about this Perl and that you can build dynamic websites with it, so let's try that. And then you get into front end because you're the only guy there. And okay, so how does this database thing work? And you kind of teach yourself. And now I'm here on your podcast, so I guess it's finally complete now.
Well, if that's the goal, then I hope that there's going to be more interesting things than being on my podcast. Anyway, so okay, what do you do these days as for work?
Uh, I went freelance a year ago. I wanted to get to be able to spend more time on self-study, pick projects that I thought were interesting. Um, I wanted to pick projects that I thought I could really contribute to, mainly in terms of making sure they work for everybody. And so, yeah, I took the plunge, um, registered with the Chamber of Commerce, and started looking for clients. And that actually wasn't so hard as I thought it would be. So now I have two really cool clients that I get to do accessibility work for both. And yeah, so far so good. It's mainly front end work mixed with some back end and database work where it needs to be done. But I'd say 90% is front end related.
You're in the Netherlands, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
are these
Happily below sea level.
are these local clients?
No, that's actually a nice question. Both of them are international. So my main client, where I work 4 days a week all around the world, is composed of people from all over the world, as the name suggests. And the client I have on Fridays, Tenon.io, is yeah, actually also international, but mainly Americans. So I tend to work from home. I'm a voluntary firefighter, and volunteer departments always have trouble finding people to be available during the day when the pager goes.
Mm,
Speaking of which, I hope it won't go during this podcast because I'll have to run out of the house.
okay.
But I have a little desk there. I get to do work, and I'm the first guy in the truck when the pager goes. So these things actually combine very well at this moment.
Mm. So you're driving a fire truck?
No, no,
Or
that's usually somebody else. I tend to just wear gear, sit in the back of the truck, and I'm a hose dragger, as they call it.
okay. And have you had a lot of fires that you had to put out?
Some decent ones.
Okay.
It's a small town, so not too many, but we've had some larger fires, some car accidents. Of course, you hope those never happen, but they do happen sometimes. And then your pager goes off and you race to the fire station. And that's also an interesting thing where you go freelance. I always make sure to tell my clients I am a volunteer firefighter. This means sometimes I have to be gone for maybe an hour, maybe more. And as long as there's an understanding that I will make up those hours later, and if the client's okay with that, then that works really well. But I'm really lucky to have understanding clients.
Yeah, I mean, Well, being a firefighter is I think a serious thing, right?
Oh,
That's
it's either making sure the build doesn't fail, or making sure the house doesn't burn down. You're fighting fires either way. So
okay. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that's the same category, but anyway. Okay, so you do quite a lot of things with accessibility. Actually, we started to talk about this podcast back when I interviewed Lucy about the dictation bridge.
right.
So let's get there. So I am more or less understand that accessibility is meaning to make websites basically accessible for people with various disabilities. Oh, I can't say that word.
People with disabilities. Yeah, sure. That's the way to see it. It's mainly, for lack of a better word, proper accessibility is more about inclusive design and making sure that when you build something, you build it in such a way that as many people as possible can use it, and not just people with disabilities. Just you kind of don't try to think about that. You know that phrase that they used to say on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, and it had this picture of a dog using a computer. I think it was Farside Comics. I'm not sure. But the whole idea is that on the internet, nobody knows if you're wearing glasses. Nobody knows if you're using a screen reader, if you're using the keyboard or the mouse. But there are so many sites that you can only use with a mouse, or you can't keyboard through them, or you can use your keyboard, but you don't get a visual indicator of what's currently being focused. And that I would say that probably 80 to 90% of the web is really hard to use for people with disabilities, for people who are just using keyboard, for people who are eating a sandwich and only have one hand available and they want to still browse the web. So the web was initially conceived by Berners-Lee with the idea of a medium that would be available to everybody. And there's this nice quote on it that you see everywhere, like the universality of the web is an essential aspect. And then it's kind of frustrating to see that so many large parts of the web are inaccessible, while it's actually not too hard to make it accessible. And it's just a matter of spreading that knowledge. So I went to yet another pro conference in Romania this year, and I spoke on inclusive design, where I basically had a little dancer application that showed side by side a Git diff, an original application that I took from the web, a little to-do JavaScript application, and I would show with small changes how I would make it a bit more accessible with each change, showing which code I changed, what the difference was from the old version to the new version, and how it became easier to use. And a lot of developers came up to me afterwards saying, oh, well, this is really interesting. We'd like to learn more. And that's a great sign, at least from the pro community itself, that they really want to make sure things improve. I gave the same talk at the Dancer conference in Vienna, and I get the reaction like, oh, can we see how accessible Meta CPAN is, the pro package website? And I said, sure, let's check. So I ran it through Tenon.io, which is an online accessibility checker that analyzes your page to see how accessible it is. And I said, well, see, here's this nice overview of issues. And right away, they wanted to sit down and say, hey, can we fix this? Which I think is just this great attitude the pro community has to wanting to just not be, defensive, like, well, people are trying. No, it's just like, let's sit down, let's fix it. We know there are problems now, we can get work done. And I think if we can get that sort of attitude towards more of web development, towards this whole, it's our job to make sure what we build works for everybody, we can really make the web better for everybody. And we're all getting older. I mean, lots of us have glasses. I only have one decent eye. I mean, what if I've tried this at some age? I know my eyesight's going to get worse. And it's also in our own interest to make sure that what we build works for other people. Because you sometimes hear from companies, oh, well, people, with bad eyesight or with disabilities, they don't use our web shop. And because we cater to young people. Yeah, but, our generation is also going to be older in, 20 years. And we're still going to be doing all our shopping online. So it's going to affect us more and more. And I'm kind of on my venting chair here right now. But
okay.
So what I'm trying to do is
it's important.
Make projects I work on accessible, and I organize meetups where we bring developers and designers together, and we try to create this exchange of ideas and knowledge to make sure that we know how to make stuff work for as many people as possible. So yesterday we had one, and we had 3 speakers, which was very much around how do you design a website while keeping the very broad autism spectrum in mind. So what are the things we should consider with moving content and bright colors and lots of moving things and changing context quickly? And it is not so much having to check off all the little checkboxes on making sure something accessible. It's more about knowing what you're building, thinking about what is it going to be like, and making sure that you test it, that you run it by people. It's not so much trying to get the list right. It's about thinking about what you're building, which I think is a good idea in any discipline.
Yeah, so I guess that there is a lot of educational educational area that where you have to teach actually people the attitude. But there are also
Yes.
various tools that, for example, just after that conversation with Lucy, I already wanted to make sure that my website is working well, or better at least. So I try to find all kind of tools that could give me some kind of report and tell me how to improve things. Let's talk about a couple of these tools that you're using or suggesting.
Okay. Well, there are some open source tools in that regard, actually. There's one I really like. It's called No Coffee. It's a Chrome extension. And what that does is you can use it to overlay a filter on their website. So to show, okay, make it blurry, make it render as somebody would see it with different types of color blindness. There is a vision condition where you have these little floaters in your vision, and it simulates that. So you get these little floaters on top of the page, and they tend to move a little bit. And I know that it is actually, I'm cheating a bit. It's not really open source, but I know the author is open to making it open source. And so I've contacted him and asked him, hey, can you put this on GitHub? Because there's actually a little bug in one of the filters that it doesn't cover the entire page. And since they're basically just SVG filters, that can probably be fixed. And then we can maybe even add more filters and make it an even better tool. So because he won't have to do it all by himself, we can just leverage this whole open source and get more people to contribute.
So you're saying that actually that there is this tool that's currently not open source. There is a bug that you reported.
Well, that's a good point. I haven't actually reported it. I've simply asked him, hey, I know you're open to opening it up.
Okay.
Can you? And I haven't said that there's, or did I? I'm not sure. I might have told him there's a bug. Maybe. I can't remember.
So the question, why would it be good for him to open source? What's the value on open sourcing, or what's the value for him not to open source it?
Well, I don't really see the value in not open sourcing it, and unless there's something he desperately wants to keep secret. But I don't see the value in that. I think open sourcing it would only have benefits, because people can use his technology to maybe integrate it in their tools, and that would just create better accessibility tools, or they could add their own filters to his extension. And the only negative aspect I could see is then it becomes a community effort, and that maybe brings in a bunch of social collaboration that needs to be managed. But I don't think that's not necessarily a problem if it becomes a problem to begin with. He won't have to do it all by himself for one. Because I can still tell him, hey, the snow filter is broken, and maybe he'll say, I don't have time the next couple of months. Oh, I'll have a look. Maybe I can fix it. So, and I'm just speculating. I don't know the guy personally, but I'm just saying,
okay,
this is how, yeah.
So what other tools do you suggest?
If you're testing accessibility, and as I said earlier, it's not about checking off the boxes. It's about proper testing. So you spoke to Lucy, so you're familiar with the concept of a screen reader.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, for the audience, it's technology that reads out a page or your desktop. So there are a bunch of closed ones. For instance, Mac OS X comes with a VoiceOver, which I use a lot to test web page accessibility. And on Windows, there is, amongst others, like JAWS, which is really, really, really expensive, thousands of dollars. There is NVDA, which you can download, and the code's on GitHub. And it's been written by two blind developers, Jamie and what's his name? Jamie and Michael. And it's just really impressive, and it gets better all the time. They've done so much stuff, so many great features that even competing screen readers like JAWS implemented only years later. That, I mean, I'm so impressed by these guys. But it's open to everybody. And for instance, I was testing some accessibility feature of a website I was building. And I wanted to know how live regions worked. And a live region means that you're using a specific attribute on a container, like a div, to say any content in here, if that changes, re-announce it to me. So you call it the live region. And I wanted to know how that worked, because I want to know how the different settings influenced the way new content was announced to the reader. So I went to GitHub and I looked through the code and I did some grepping, and there it is. And with JAWS, I wouldn't be able to do that, but this gave me insight in how the tool worked, how I could maybe improve my website's accessibility. And even if there's a bug, other people could fix it. A funny anecdote is that it's written by blind people, so it's a lot of C++ code without new lines or spaces. It's kind of hard to read, but you can of course run that through a prettifier.
So what's easy for them, for blind people, it's hard for people who can see, because they are depending on the new lines more.
Yeah, we're the visual structure we're really used to in our, there are whole debates on where your bracket should be, but who cares, because it's interpreted that way, differently that way by them. So there's also contributions from other people when it comes to translations, which is just made so much easier, because you can just use something like GitHub to issue your own pull request and collaborate. And I mean, I know they're just absolutely swamped doing so much stuff, so making it possible for other people to contribute just really helps everybody.
You mentioned the W3 validator and the HTML5 validator earlier.
Did you know the original W3 validator is written in Perl?
Oh yeah, I think I know. It's still in.
It still is, yeah. I actually went through a bit of the code. It's a bit older, but hey, the thing still works. So that's Perl, It's just keeping the web working behind the scenes. So that the older HTML DTD validator is written in Perl. So that's at validator.w3.org. There's also a newer one at validator.nu, which is more of a modern living standard HTML5 validator. But they're both open. So you can just go through a source on GitHub. The newer one is written in Java, I think. But what's cool about both of these tools is that they have an API as well. So you can use curl or whatever client you write yourself to just query the report for a page. You get JSON back. You can analyze the JSON. The spec is documented, and then you can, for instance, include it in your task runners like Grunt or Gulp or your continuous integration tooling. And so whenever somebody pushes a change to a front end, you run it through the validator. If it throws up a warning, then hey, it doesn't pass. So it is. I think it's really nice that again that stuff is open because other people can contribute. You can adapt it to the way the HTML spec changes as we go forward, and new items are added to the spec. So. And of course, the W3, it would be weird if something of the W3C was closed because that stuff is so intricate with the rest of the open web that, yeah, I pretty much take that for granted. Thinking of other tools I'm using. So there is another one. There's actually two other ones because I'm talking about validation and the HTML validator and the W3 validator, they're pretty basic. So the W3 validator is basically just document type declaration validation, schema validation. And the HTML5 one is a bit more modern. It will catch a bit more things, but there are only so many actual problems you can find with those. It won't check any of actually I don't think it checks the state of area attributes for extra accessibility and whether you're using those right. So there are libraries for that help. There is I think the Google Chrome Accessibility Toolkit is on GitHub, which is a JavaScript library that you can use to query the DOM and run checks on it. But there's also a toolkit that's made by DQ Systems, which is DQ is an accessibility company. They do mostly consulting and auditing work. But they also have something called the Axe, and it's the open source accessibility engine, which basically is a whole bunch of JavaScript validation rules. So since it's a rule set, you can include it. They've built it that way so it can be included with your own tools. So you can use their checks to validate your own projects. And it's open source, so lots of other people are also adding rules to that. But for instance, those are rules that will go a bit deeper and say, your headings aren't in the correct order. Or you're starting with an H2 heading and you actually don't have an H1 heading. Or you're not using the value for this area attribute correctly, or basic stuff like contrast rules or font size rules, and it is difficult to catch all accessibility problems, and I don't think we'll ever get there. There'll always be an amount of work that you have to check manually. There's always going to be the human factor, because otherwise you get back to that accessibility checkbox accessibility. And I had this good point and it flew away. It's gone now. So I totally lost my train of thought. It's terrible.
I have a different question then, or maybe it's related. So people who don't know much about accessibility, like myself, but they have a website and they're not big corporations. They can't afford to hire a company providing this kind of service. How can we learn about accessibility? Is there some kind of a group where I could ask people to take a look at my website and they would point out a couple of things maybe, or give directions? I mean, if people can go to a meetup where they meet you and hear a presentation, that's great. But most of the people are not close enough for where you live.
Right. Well, there are various accessibility meetups around the world, but there are there's the WebA mailing list. So there's the Web Accessibility Initiative, where they have a mailing list and anyone can just ask questions there. There are various forums. There's, of course, forums like SidePoint, and they're not accessibility specific, but you can ask your questions there. There are tools that will mainly catch a lot of the, for lack of a better term, low-hanging fruit. For instance, the X tooling I talked about earlier, the DQ's X library, there's a Chrome integrator. So what it does is in your Chrome inspector tools, and it's also that for Firefox, but in your Chrome inspector tools, you get this new tab, it says X, and you can say, analyze this page. So it chugs for a bit, and it shows you this whole list of, okay, this element has this problem, here's how to fix it. This element has that problem, here's how to fix it. And that already shows you a lot of the basic stuff that you can catch that way. And the whole point of that is that tooling prevents, that sort of automated tooling, it prevents regression. And that's the most important thing, because accessibility shouldn't be something you do at the end when you're done. Like, okay, I've built my site, let's see how accessible it is. It should be part of the beginning, like you start out writing tests and documentation, and you start out writing decent accessible code, and you iterate and iterate and iterate in a nice agile fashion. But in that same sense, you just make sure that you run your code through your automated tooling and you catch all the basic stuff there. And for everything else, there's manual testing, like you can hire companies for that, or you can of course ask friends to run through your site. But there are entire companies that specialize by having a diverse set of people that will go through your site and tell you what problems they can find. And there are companies like DQ and the Pichello Group, which will audit your entire site for a fee, of course. But yeah, if you don't have that option, these open tools are a great alternative to already make sure that your baseline is pretty good. And personally, I'm just happy people will take the effort to make sure the pages are accessible.
Okay, I think we are getting really close to the time. We have to finish
Already,
this conversation. Yeah, time flies very fast when you enjoy yourselves. So, any shout out that you would like to say to people? Anything that you haven't mentioned that you really want to?
Oh boy, that's difficult. Shout outs. No, I don't want to play favoritisms. I think just, the accessibility community and, the awesome stuff a lot of people are doing, a lot of them in their own free time, to make sure that making the web work for everybody just becomes easier every day. Yeah, that's a very good goal. So thank you very much for coming on the show and spending the time. And I hope that we'll be able to get sites more accessible. And we can talk later on even more about this, because I think it's a very important subject. Awesome. Well, if you ever have questions, just hit me up. And thanks for letting me ramble.
Don't worry, I will. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.